Welcome to the third lesson in Session 3 on adding and subtracting rational expressions. Adding and subtracting fractions requires us to rewrite the expression using a least common denominator. The process of adding and subtracting rational expressions is as follows. Our first step is to completely factor all denominators. Next, we have to use those denominators and identify the least common denominator, or the LCD. Then we have to rewrite all of our fractions using the LCD. Once we've done that, we can finally combine the numerators, and then we look to simplify. Sometimes there will be some canceling as well to simplify that fraction. The least common denominator of a fraction is represented by the product of each of the prime factors. So in this case, I'm going to provide you with a couple of fractions, and we're going to identify the LCD of each pair of rational expressions. So in our first pair, we have x over x squared minus 9 and x over x squared plus 6x plus 9. Our first step is to factor. So we have to factor each of the two denominators, giving us x plus 3 times x minus 3 and x plus 3 to the second power. So my LCD has to contain x plus 3. The fraction on the right has x plus 3 to the second power. So I always use as many as the greatest exponent. So I have to have x plus 3 to the second power in my common denominator. I also have to have the quantity of x minus 3. So the least common denominator is x plus 3 to the second power times x minus 3. So if a prime factor shows up more than once, we use the factor with the greatest exponent. On the right, we have 1 over x plus 2 and 1 over x minus 7. Both of those denominators are prime. Now each prime factor has to be represented in the common denominator. So if you ever run into the situation where you have prime denominators, then the least common denominator is the product of those two. So in this case, my least common denominator is going to be the quantity of x plus 2 times the quantity of x plus 7. So the LCD between prime factors is the product of those factors. Next, we're going to take it a step further and we're going to rewrite fractions using the least common denominator. We're going to multiply the numerator and denominator by the prime factor that is missing from the least common denominator. So we've already identified the least common denominator is x plus 3 to the second power times x minus 3. This is the same example we used in the previous slide. Now the fraction on the right needs the quantity of x plus 3 in order to be the least common denominator, and the fraction on the left needs the quantity of x plus 3. The fraction on the right needs the quantity of x minus 3. So we multiply top and bottom, numerator and denominator, by the prime factor that's missing from the LCD. Now I distribute in the numerators, and now I'm going to look to simplify. So we have x squared plus 3x and x squared minus 3x. Now, over on the right, I have 1 over x plus 2 and 1 over x minus 7. We've already identified the LCD. Since they are both prime factors, then the product of those prime factors is the LCD. So the fraction on the left needs the quantity of x minus 7, and the quantity on the right needs, the fraction on the right needs the quantity of x plus 2. So I multiply the numerator and the denominator of the first fraction by x minus 7, multiply the numerator and the denominator of the fraction on the right by x plus 2. Notice I didn't do any distributing in the denominator. I'm leaving the denominators in prime factored form. We're never going to redistribute in the denominator. Now we're going to add and subtract monomial denominators. So my first example, I have 5 over 3x to the third minus 4 over 7xy. So my least common denominator in this case is going to be 21x to the third y. So in order to rewrite my fraction using that least common denominator, I need to multiply the fraction on the left by 7y, numerator and denominator, and I need to multiply the fraction on the right by 3x to the second, numerator and denominator. After doing so, I get 35y over my LCD minus 12x to the second over the LCD. Now remember, once I've rewritten the fraction using that common denominator, now I can combine the numerators. Doing so gives me 35y minus 12x to the second. Now I want to look to simplify that. I cannot factor the numerator, and since the numerator is not factored at this point, there's no more work to do. So I have 35y minus 12x to the second over 21x to the third y. In the second example on this slide, I have 3x minus 1 over 2x squared is minus 3x plus 1 over 5x. So I identify my least common denominator, which in this case is 10x to the second. Now to rewrite the fraction on the left using the LCD, I need to multiply it by 5, numerator and denominator. I need to multiply the fraction on the right by 2x, numerator and denominator. Doing so gives me 15x minus 5 over the LCD, minus 6x squared plus 2x over the LCD. Once I've rewritten my fractions using the LCD, now I can combine the numerators. So doing so is going to give me negative 6x to the second plus 13x minus 5, all over my common denominator of 10x to the second. Again, I'm looking to simplify. There is no common factor between negative 6x to the second, 13x, and negative 5. We can't factor that trinomial, so our answer here in this case is done. Here we go. We're going to add and subtract polynomial denominators. So my first fraction, I have x minus 5 over x squared minus 9, and I'm adding x plus 2 over x plus 3. So remember, we have to factor first. So we have a difference of squares. And once we clean that up, now we need to identify the least common denominator. So in this case, I have x plus 3 and x minus 3 on the left, and on the right, I just have the x plus 3. So my LCD is going to be the product x plus 3 times x minus 3. And my first fraction on the left already has the least common denominator. So I don't need to multiply the fraction on the left by anything. The fraction on the right, I need to multiply by the quantity of x plus 3 over x plus 3. Doing so in the numerator gives me x squared minus x minus 6, so we distribute the numerator, but we leave the denominator in prime factored form. Once I've rewritten the fractions using the least common denominator, now I can combine the numerators and simplify. So it's going to give me x squared minus 11. I can't factor x squared minus 11, so it's not going to be able to cancel with anything in the denominator. So x squared minus 11 over the product of x plus 3 times x minus 3 is my answer. Now in the next slide, we have 5x over x squared minus x minus 6, and we're going to subtract 4 over x squared plus 4x plus 4. And we have to factor completely, so I factor the left side and the right side. Now I have to identify my common denominator. My least common denominator in this case is going to be the quantity of x minus 3 and the quantity of x plus 2 to the second power. So my fraction on the left needs to be multiplied by x plus 2, numerator and denominator. And my fraction on the right needs to be multiplied by x minus 3, numerator and denominator. Distributing in the numerator gives me 5x squared plus 10x minus 4x minus 12. We have to distribute that negative when combining our like terms, which is going to give me 5x to the second plus 6x plus 12 over my least common denominator. Now, we can't simplify that any further, so I have my answer. Well, that wraps up the third lesson in session 7. Good luck on the quiz, and email us if you have any questions.